Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Today we are excited to bring Breaking the Bias Around Attracting Hiring Women in Tech. I am Megan. I'm the head of growth here at VanHack. My pronouns are she and her, and we're really excited to have amazing panelists today to do a deep dive and a casual conversation on the subject. Just for those of you that aren't maybe familiar with VanHack, VanHack is a tech-enabled recruiting platform that connects amazing tech talent to amazing companies. We're really excited in the lead up to our upcoming Women in Tech hiring event, which is happening April 5th to 7th, where there's a great opportunity for companies to speed interview with over 150 candidates and make quality hires fast. You can sign up for the link. We're going to place that within the chat. But first and foremost, let me tell you a little bit about today's presentation and some housekeeping items. So behind the scenes, our chat is going to be monitored by our B2B marketing team. They're going to be able to, if you have questions, you can actually just kind of ask those questions there. And towards the end of today's session, we're going to be able to answer those questions. You're also going to have the ability to upvote questions. So if there's a certain topic that you're really interested to learn more on, please upvote it and we'll try to get to it towards the latter part of the presentation. We're also going to have another webinar next week, and we'll be able to place some information on that as well. Next week on March 29th, we're going to have building spaces for women in tech, for women in tech to grow and thrive. We're going to be joined by industry experts and community leaders within our tech ecosystem to talk about retention strategies as well. And then finally, this session is going to be recorded and you're going to be able to play it on demand later. So just to keep that in mind as well. We'll also be sending over this recorded session for all those that have signed up. So be sure to take a look at your email and in the next couple of days, because we'll be sending information and all of our resources there. But first and foremost, I want to be, I'm just really thrilled to be here and to have such amazing, diverse panelists today to discuss and do a deep dive and casual conversation. Let me take the time quickly to introduce our panelists from such diverse backgrounds so that we can have a really great conversation. Catherine Chan, she's the CEO and founder of FitIn, an advocate for better access to physical and mental health resources. She's a staunch supporter of the fitness industry for their role in helping improve physical and mental wellness for millions of Canadians. And her role is, she also has a role as the Director of Stakeholder Relations for the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. Catherine, I'd just like to welcome you here today, and really looking forward to your perspectives. Leah is, pardon me here, I'm just stumbling, has extensive experience in software delivery and bringing new products to market. She's the CEO of tilr. She's worked alongside of companies, large organizations, as well as in the scale-up space. She's worked alongside Tech Toronto, as well as time at BMO. Welcome, Leah. Sarah Maledy, born and raised in North Vancouver. She's a talent acquisition lead at Thinkific, where she has had the opportunity to connect talented people with incredible engineering and product opportunities. She has a background with both agency and in-house technical recruitment, and she's passionate about scaling diverse teams. Welcome, Sarah. And last but not least, Connolly. Kat is a full stack developer with Checkfront, and she made a tech pivot in the last few years, I believe 2018. She currently works for Checkfront and is currently working remotely from the Rocky Mountains. Kat initially learned to code in a boot camp back in 2018 and has worked in the startup world, both as a full-time and freelance for the last 3.5 years. Welcome, Kat. So we've done our introductions now, and it's time that we kind of go into talk about a little bit more about why we're all here today. So I'm gonna hope that everybody can kind of jump in here. Speakers can jump in here, and if there's anything that I've missaid, please feel free to also introduce yourself as well. Yeah, we're just going to kind of start things off with a kickoff and a lightning round. For all of our panelists today, if you can name one bias or challenge that you faced in your past or your current role that you'd be interested to share. Okay, I'm going to ask, I see Catherine, I see that you're ready to answer.
Well, for me, as a woman with a tech-based business, it's funding. As people may know, women are still getting around 2%. It's gone down. Actually, it used to be closer to 3%, but since the pandemic, it's back down to just about the 2%. And the bias there is really around when you get into meetings with investors, they tend to ask women questions that ask them how they're going to help their business survive and why is your business going to fail. Whereas with men who are pitching investors, they tend to ask them how their business is going to succeed. And so, unless you're willing to turn that narrative around mid sentence, it's really tough to be constantly battling against questions that are asking you, why are you failing?
Thanks, Catherine. Kat?
Yeah, I think this one's maybe like a little bit more obvious, but pre-pandemic when we were doing meetups, I was going to a lot of tech meetups, and I found that most often people just assumed that I was not a developer, like I was organizing the event or somehow like helping out or all these other things. And so it was always very funny to sort of point people out that I'm actually in STEM.
Cool. Sarah?
Yeah. When I was just trying to break into recruitment for the first time, had an interview with a senior leader, male leader, who told me I made him very comfortable. He felt like he could talk to me, but he wasn't unsure if I was sharky enough for agency recruitment, just based on my mannerisms and the way I spoke. I think making people comfortable enough to quit their job is a good thing, personally. But he seemed to have a bit of a problem with it and didn't end up hiring me.
All right, Leah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Catherine's story about funding. I don't know if you guys read about this, but the CEO of Nixware, she was pregnant with twins when she was fundraising, and one of the investors asked her, how she was going to balance, and she didn't end up letting them invest, even though they wanted to. And I thought that was such a nice, great move for women. But the story I wanted to share was a little bit different than everyone else's. I worked at the bank, and I found that there were a couple men who actually I had trouble gaining respect from, being a female in that role. And it wasn't even something I noticed. I just thought they were difficult people. And eventually my boss at the time said, I want you to know this is because you're female. And I thought, oh, I should have more awareness about what's going on around me. And, I ended up, working really hard and eventually gaining respect, but you shouldn't have to.
Absolutely. Does anybody want to add anything here? Are we good to move on to the next question? Okay, yeah, honestly, one of the things I want to also talk about here is talking about some of your current roles and talking about some of your previous roles. Specifically in the startup and the scale up space. Can you speak to that as well in that phase of working in organizations like that? Maybe I'll start with you, Leah, there, if that works.
Yeah, just my experience in growing teams.
Yeah.
So I've hired a lot of people in my day. I was employee 9 at CoinSquare. I launched 2 divisions there, building 1 to 30, 1 to 12, while growing that whole company to about 200. At BMO, I took over a team of about 250 developers and grew it to 400 over the course of COVID, when digital got a lot more funding. Now I'm running a smaller team. We're 6, but we are looking to double. And it's hard on the technical side. At one point at BMO, I looked at my full-time developers and realized I had 3 women. And we're talking 3 out of about 100 full-time people. So really, really low percentage. And we'd put up job applications and get 0 female applicants. So really, really challenging. And you just have to make an effort, and you have to talk about it. As a leadership team, we talked about it all the time. What are we going to do to bring in more women? How How are we going to do it? We got involved with universities and mentoring and other programs. But hiring women has always been a struggle. And one of the hardest things is when you look around at your own leadership team as a female leader and see the lack of women that you have.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. You know, we talk about, if we look at some of the stats when we were researching for today, you know, that women are underrepresented in the tech in tech companies, you know, 34.4% of the workforce, and within engineering teams, it's, you know, often we're seeing numbers between 12 and 14, depending on where we're looking. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences of just kind of like looking around, right? Looking around on your teams and taking that moment to kind of pause and reflect. You know, Kat, I see that you're ready to answer this question as well. Kat?
Yeah, going back to, you know, when I took a coding bootcamp, I was the only female in my cohort of, I think there was about 12 of us. And then I went on to run the bootcamp for a little bit, and we saw maybe 1 to 2 people per class, like as female identifying. And, you know, and so I felt compelled to like really push and support and make sure, because I think for myself and for a lot of other people, you know, I felt like this wasn't a field for me initially when I sort of switched into tech. And I think especially in an engineering role, it's really hard to see yourself succeed and grow in that role. You know, and then moving on from there, you know, when I started back at Neo Financial, there were 20 employees and I was the first female hired. And slowly but surely, well, not slowly but surely, in a week, we had 2 more females on the team who were great. But the engineering team kind of stayed stagnant for a really long time. And then, you know, only had a couple come and go for the next period of time. And so it's just been interesting seeing where sort of my roles end up. And I have a bit of a nature versus nurture battle all the time, because I end up doing a lot of management work. And I always question, is it because I like doing management work? Is it because that's kind of, you know, my background, or you know, when I'm seeing male counterparts moving into tech lead roles and more technical roles where I'm going into more management roles, I think it's easy to kind of question my own trajectory within a company. Is it because I'm, you know, one of the only females here, or is it because this is like a skill set that is an asset?
Thanks. Sarah, are you good to go next?
Yeah. So before joining Thinkific, when I was an agency recruiter, I hired for maybe about 7 clients that were tech companies across the Vancouver tech scene, really focused a little bit on the East Coast, and had a really tough time finding women for their teams, or non-binary folks even for their teams. Being in Thinkific, it's a lot easier to, you know, confidently and comfortably pitch a culture that you're immersed in and that you believe in. I've been working with our engineering teams for the last like year and a half or a little bit more to scale out those teams. When I joined Thinkific, we were about 80 people. 2.5 years later, we're 500 plus. And so we've been growing pretty quickly. I've really been focusing on scaling on the engineering teams. We brought in a couple director level women, which has been really exciting, especially in like the infrastructure space, which is, you know, very male dominated. Focused on bringing in some leadership on that side as well, bringing in somebody at a principal level, which is really exciting. And all of that has to be sourced outreach. So really focusing on diversifying our pipelines, really even focusing on making sure that we're removing gendered language from our job descriptions and, you know, really supporting that. So there's a lot of different ways that we've been able to do that. We're certainly not perfect. There's a lot of areas that we would love to improve our diversity, but been able to make the most impact working in-house for sure.
All right, we're going to move on to another question now. So as a woman in the tech industry, your career trajectory often isn't as clear as your male counterparts. Can panelists here kind of speak on your experience and perhaps of your experience of imposter syndrome in your role as a woman in tech, is either in a male dominated industry? Catherine, you good to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So imposter syndrome, I have great issues with that phrase. I think realistically, the whole startup ecosystem, business in general, is set up for guys to succeed. And primarily that's because, the history of business, the history of the startup ecosystem was, it started with guys, and women have always struggled to get into it. However, when we put ourselves against the image that's out there, when we put ourselves up against how it's supposed to look and the flow that's supposed to be happening per how they teach it actually in a lot of accelerators, that doesn't work for a lot of women. So I think that whole imposter syndrome is not that we think that we're not good enough, because we know that we are all that and more. However, because we don't fit nice and tidily and neatly into how people expect us to grow our businesses, because we have to find workarounds, that's where that imposter syndrome comes from. It's not set up for us to succeed. It's not set up for us to be able to follow that flow. And so we think that we're not doing it right. And that's not what it's about. What it is about staying in the game. It's about finding the next workaround. It's about, solving a new solution that you've come up against because of gender. And so we have to do it differently. And that does not mean that we have imposter syndrome. It just means that, we're setting ourselves up against standards that don't exist for people like us.
Thanks for sharing. Leah?
I almost don't want to answer. That was such a good answer. So definitely agree with everything Catherine just said. Imposter syndrome, it's real. And I've actually done a lot of reading about it. And it's real in a lot of high performers, especially female high performers. I had major imposter syndrome with BMO. I joined to do strategy and operations and somehow ended up basically being the CTO of digital banking without ever having written a line of code. And, I kept telling every boss I had, I spend half my day stressed out about not being technical. And they'd all say to me, but nobody cares. I mean, that's not why we hired you. And I think that really speaks to what Catherine was just saying. It's about, getting it done. And, eventually I got very comfortable with my strengths, not just with myself, but being very clear with my team and saying, here's what I'm good at, and here's what I'm going to do. Here's my vision. And here's where all of you come in. And I think what I learned is when you sort of allow yourself to accept that you're not good at everything and that you're there because of the things you are good at, and you tell your team what they can be accountable for. People love being accountable, and they actually, they don't judge you for what you can't do. They love you for allowing them to fill in those gaps and giving them those opportunities. But sort of to circle back to the question, I was part of 3 separate leadership teams at BMO. I was the only female every single time. And I think you also need to not be afraid to speak up. And so every time we'd have a, org change meeting, and I'd be staring back at, 10 or 12 men on the video screen, and they'd say, anything have anything to add? I'd say, yeah, we need more women on this team. I'm looking at a bunch of, guys on a screen, and I'd watch them get all awkward and, but slowly but surely they'd follow up with me behind the scenes and say, what can we do? Tell us how to engage more women. And so I think, you have to own it and, take responsibility a little bit for helping other women get to where you're getting in to get these opportunities.
Thanks for sharing. Sarah?
Yeah, I would second all of that as well, and really resonated with what Catherine shared about not liking the term imposter syndrome. I think it puts the onus on the person who has those feelings of inadequacy, and it kind of others people in a way that some people have this syndrome and some people don't. I think to a degree, most high performers have some inner critic that they're working through, and work on an exceptional team of very talented people, and at times catch myself looking around and wondering oh, how did I slip through the cracks? How did I land here? Even today, every once in a while that thought pops into my head. How it shows up for me is that kind of superhero persona of if I work harder, if I do more, if I say yes to everything, then I'll be able to prove my value or show my worth, even though nobody is expecting that of me. Or I must be an expert and I have to know everything and I need to read more and understand more. I'm never really satisfied with the amount of information that I have. And so it's definitely something that it exists because, yeah, as everyone has said, like these systems were not really built for us. And we have to deal with a lot of microaggression that tells us that maybe we're not an expert in our field, or perhaps we have, a previous experience of being, disregarded or having our opinions, spoken over, and we have to work within those experiences to really believe in ourselves. And so I think it's a mix of things. I think every high performer, every high performing woman especially, probably deals with a degree of imposter syndrome or inner critic. But I've seen it in some of the most high performing women I've ever worked with.
Thanks for sharing, Sarah. We're gonna move to the next section of the presentation today, and we're gonna talk a little bit about industry stats and insights in terms of what you've observed when it comes to hiring women in tech. What are some of the top biases that you've faced when you've been faced when considering hiring? Catherine, you're ready to go.
Yeah, I can start. There's two things I want to say. So first of all, I haven't really had the opportunity to do much hiring for FitIn yet for developers. And quite frankly, it's because of that same funding issue I brought up at the very beginning. So, women are only going to get 2% or less of the funding. So it's a real slog. But similarly to the reason why women aren't getting funding, we say we need more women investors because we need more women to be funded. Why are we putting the onus back on women to have to create opportunities for women? That's the reality. But unfortunately, that also kind of filters downhill. So I'm not getting funding for my business. I have to continue to bootstrap, which means that I can't afford to hire. I'd be more likely to hire a woman developer, absolutely. But I can't do that right now. However, the other part that I want to mention is, it's actually very difficult for women to hire, especially if you're a solopreneur or a woman in tech and you don't have technical background, which is my case. I was actually told flat out by an investor a number of years ago, and partially very upset about this. And on the other hand, I kind of wanted to thank him for his honesty about it. He told me flat out that I should probably find, a white guy to be my CTO or my senior developer, because no one wants to look, or no investor wants to look at a pitch deck and see women, 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 women in a tech-based company. So that was like a come to whatever moment for me. And it really kind of reinforced for me that as a woman founder in a technical business, there's politics to play. And that's not how I want to run my business. Certainly, especially as a social enterprise, I'm not looking to get involved in that way. I'm looking to try and resolve some of these issues, but that's not the reality out there. And we're encouraged to maintain or toe the line, as it were, because that's what investors are looking for.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think first I want to say thank you for your vulnerability there, Catherine, and sharing that. I'm so sorry that was your experience. That's awful, and you shouldn't have been told that. But from my side, thankfully, right now I'm an organization that is very excited about DEIB and is really excited about diversifying our talent and really supporting the continued growth of that talent and development. But I have definitely, as a non-engineer and as a woman interviewing very male-dominated space, experienced previously a lot of you don't know what you're talking about. Have you ever heard of React? Very basic languages and frameworks that, of course, I've heard about that are not new in the market and been spoken down to. I've also, on the other side, interviewed a lot of C-suite director level candidates, and the things that they will share with you is quite shocking. I've had men tell me that women are front-end engineers because they're creative and they're good at design and they belong in the front end, and quite proudly shared with me that was the culture on his team. And so it can be quite shocking, the things that you just hear in the interview space. I'm very grateful that I work for an organization currently that is very much not like that, and that is not something that would ever fly.
Leah?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of women's careers being disadvantaged when they take parental leave. You know, tech companies move so fast that if you go on a parental leave, you can be coming back to a completely different role or a completely different company. And I think this also creates bias against hiring women, because when you're a certain age, and you know, I've interviewed a lot at that age, you can tell people are looking like, oh, they're trying to find out, are you single? Are you married? They want to know, like, is this person going to have kids? And I think, why would you pass up on a great person just because they're going to probably raise, you know, a great kid in this world who can also do wonderful things? And so I think companies need to do a better job at getting one comfortable with this, but also just ensuring that when people leave for a parental leave, that they're not, you know, it's not impeding on their success. So, and again, this would only be if the person going on leave is comfortable with it or wants this. If someone wants to go on leave and come back, that's also obviously okay. But for those who, you know, are interested in staying engaged, I think that, you know, you should have a conversation before someone goes on leave and talk about where the company may go and where their role may go. And if their role is going to evolve, you know, are they ready for that next step? And if they're not ready, what are some of the things they could do, again, only if they want, when they're on leave, so that they're ready for that, you know, more senior role or that hop when they come back. So they don't come back and all of a sudden there's one or two people ahead of them. And again, if this person wants to stay engaged, set up a cadence of discussion so that they can stay connected to the company and so that they're not completely at a loss when they come back. I think we need to have better programs to ensure that we're helping careers progress as people also raise their families.
Thanks, Leah. Kat?
Yeah, I guess I want to answer this more from the perspective of someone being hired and interviewing, just because I have done interviewing, and my contribution to that is I saw almost no females in interviewing for technical roles. But from my perspective, when I left my full-time job last July, I had a flood of messages and invitations to chat with different founders and CTOs and CEOs. And almost all of them were men, and almost all the conversations was about an hour and a half of somebody talking at me, never asking me questions, never trying to figure out how I am as a developer, what technologies I'm familiar with, literally no questions. And I remember even one of them went so far as to tell me that they only wanted to hire a female team because they wanted to be seen as you know, this forward-thinking company with only female technical team. Meanwhile, you know, he wasn't a female, which I found very interesting. And then at the end of it, once more, I didn't speak more than 3 words for an hour and a half. And he offered me a job, you know, to start Monday. And it just, it rubbed me the wrong way. Just because I felt like I wasn't being considered for my talents or for my contributions or for, you know, my interest and passion about this career. It was literally a bunch of male CEOs looking to diversify their company. And I felt like I was being very tokenized to a certain extent. And it wasn't until I met with another company a little bit later on. And, you know, the first person they had me talk to was their head architect, who is this incredibly genius female PhD level, I think she's PhD in physics. And it was just like such an amazing change of pace. And we had this amazing back and forth conversation and asked each other questions. And I just reached out to her after and I just said, I didn't think that there was any senior management left like this. And it, for the first time, like I then started going down the route and talking more with this company and looking at working with them, because it seemed like instead of just telling me they cared about diversity, they actually had women in positions of power who were doing some really interesting stuff, who actually cared about who they were hiring. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, Kat. And this guy's, you're teeing us up for our next question as well. You know, we've talked about gender biases, but there's also a lot of other biases that women do face. My question for the team here is, when planning for the new year or the new quarter, does your organization set diversity, equity, and inclusion goals? And if so, what's that process been like for those that have gone through it? If anybody is open to kind of jump in here right now, looks like Sarah, you're ready to go.
Yeah. So we scaled a bunch last year. We started the year around 220, and we're currently at 500. Last year, we had over 300 accepted offers, and so we're currently in a space where we need to remeasure our current state of diversity at Thinkific, and so we are looking in safe ways to do that. Opt-out options for folks, and really making sure that it's something that they're comfortable sharing with us as a first step. Before we can create smart goals for it to be measurable, we need to know what our current state is. There's a lot of things that we're currently doing that isn't, we want to stay away from that tokenism that Kat mentioned. Nobody wants to be a diversity hire. It doesn't feel good. It would be, really disingenuous for us to then be able to say, look at our diverse team, when we didn't hire based on merit or skill set. So really what we can control is that top of the funnel. So looking at if, 75% of our applicants are male, for example, then how do we inject some women into that pipeline? And we can do that. We can control that by sourcing. We can do that through direct outreach, through engaging people. As long as we have a diverse funnel at each step, then we hire the best person for the job, and you're far more likely to have a diverse team at the end of it. That's just my personal philosophy on that, just really staying away from tokenism and really making sure that you're reaching out to smart, qualified candidates, making sure that you're diversifying the funnel through other means, if it's not immediately available through inbound applications, and just really making sure that we're working that way, rather than saying this role needs to be a woman so that we can pat ourselves on the back, or like this role needs to be, anything, right? Like you could insert any minority group there, and it would just feel very disingenuous. So I'm more along the lines of doing it through regular talent attraction and regular outreach versus doing it through creating a list of hires that we want to make women. So, yeah.
Thank you. Catherine?
I'll keep mine pretty short, but just, remember that the government put out the 50-30 challenge last year. So it's pretty easy just to, say that you're going to sign on to that and accept that challenge. I've gone one step further where I've reported our outcomes on our governance page on FitIn. So you can do that as well. But I think, one thing to keep in mind, like just to have, if you create a good team environment, you can have conversations where someone can say, like, we're not looking too diverse nowadays. Perhaps we should look at, diversifying our team again. And it's okay to have that conversation. And, to Sarah's point, it should be an organic process. So you're hiring all the time, you should be in hiring frame of mind all the time, even if you aren't hiring all the time. And then just making sure that you're at least hitting some parity with your interviewing stage. Even just the process of affording underrepresented minorities the opportunity to interview can sometimes make a really big step towards helping them to become more comfortable and perhaps win a job in the future, just because they've had the opportunity to interview more frequently and get that experience. It helps them come across, to represent themselves better.
Thanks, Kat.
Yeah, for me, something I decided in looking for a job this past year is I will only work for a company that has a diversity and inclusion policy in place. If you don't have one in place, you're not trying. As much as you say that you're putting out an effort, it's just not a thing. And so I think Javier, who's on the people team at Checkfront, is here. And so I make sure in my first interview to quiz whoever's talking, because if it's someone on a people team, someone from HR, they should be aware of any sort of diversity programs in place. And I probably give them a bit of a hard time and really drill them to make sure that it's a real policy and not some sort of fluffy thing, because like I said, if it's not in place, then it's non-existent. And if the company's not fully aware of what's happening down to the smallest employees, then it's not a factor. So yeah. And Checkfront, I ended up there for a lot of reasons, but Javier was very good at answering all those questions and getting into the specifics of diversity and inclusion there.
Awesome. And for the folks here starting the hiring process and building your job descriptions, like right from the beginning, are there tools or processes that you folks have used to ensure descriptions are balanced and inclusive to be able to attract talent to apply? Does anyone want to jump in? Leah?
I mean, it's not a direct answer to the question, but I mean, I am the CEO of a platform that focuses on recruitment. And so I guess I can just talk a little bit about, you know, the platform, which is we strip everything down to skills. And so we strip the resume down to skills, and then we strip the job description down to skills. And so we ensure that we're surfacing the best people based on actual skill set matches. And so, you know, the hope is that this is going to take at least some of the initial bias out of the recruiting process, because there's nothing to look at. You can't look at someone's gender, you can't look at their location, you're not looking at their name, you're just looking at skills compared to skills. And so, you know, obviously that's something that is important to our whole organization, is making sure that we're also hiring that way. So anyways, that's a little bit more about the company.
Awesome. I think we have a lot of questions that are coming in also, but Sarah, I think you can jump in here to answer.
Yeah, I think diverse hiring starts long before the job is launched. It starts with things like bias training at your company. It starts with things like a strong hiring brief where you look at, these are the skills that are necessary. These are the things that we can train. These are the competencies that we're looking for, so that you can break it down into data points and you can ask smart questions that answer the direct questions that you need to know about whether this person is capable of doing the job or not. It also comes down to job descriptions. Gender decoders are great. There's a couple of really great options out there if you want to use AI. But you can also do it yourself. There's a lot of information online about gendered language, fast-paced environment, you know, things that suggest a lot of overtime, or schedules that are unclear are not going to be places that draw a lot of women who are parents, right? So there's a lot of things that you can use. There are a lot of tools available. There's a lot of information online. I think it just comes down to really understanding what you're looking for, even before you launch the search, getting your team aligned on that, learning the difference between what is coachable and teachable and what you absolutely need as business today, and just being able to measure that effectively and measure candidates effectively. At Thinkific, we always have 2 people in every interview stage. We input our notes and our key takeaways about every candidate before we discuss them, so that we actually get a chance to put our unbiased thoughts, or not biased by the other interviewer thoughts, down on paper before we debrief and talk about why we feel those things. Every technical challenge is stripped of somebody's name and identifying information. It's also reviewed by 2 people. So I think just making sure that you have a diverse team involved in the hiring process as well, as really understanding with data, what you're looking for.
Thanks for sharing, Sarah, and just being mindful of time here right now. It looks like we're already 40 minutes into this discussion, and I know we've had a lot of audience questions as well over the course of the presentation. But what we're going to do also is we're going to have an opportunity via email to send in questions to the panelists. We'll do a follow-up today and make sure that we can include all of those answers as well. So I'm going to do maybe one more question from what we had kind of planned today, and then maybe one audience question, and then we'll continue having these conversations after today's session. But what I'm hoping to kind of do right now is just kind of like, you know, looking at women-focused communities and professional networks. You know, where, for the panelists here today, where have you found support, and are there networks and communities and programs that you can recommend to folks here today? source either great talent or look for professional development or mentorship, or for those of you that have been looking and aspiring to find funding, what you have done. I believe, Kat, you're ready to go.
Yeah, and I guess more from like a mentorship perspective too, because that's just where I have the most experience. But like I during lockdown volunteered for the Technovation Challenge, which I don't know if you know about it, but it's a tech challenge for girls, aged I think 12 to 18, and they learn how to build an app and create an app and do the business side of it and the technical side of it. And for me, like, as a mentor to that was just like so inspiring, and I never had that growing up. And so to be able to be involved in that process and to have a team of other really incredible women involved in it was just so refreshing to see. And I made a lot of really great connections through there. But something interesting that happened to me a couple days ago actually was there was a student that I mentored back from Lighthouse Labs, and she had reached out to me. She was looking for work, and I've for the past week or so I've been coaching her on her first big interview and talking to her just about how and she had a lot of imposter syndrome and wanted to quit at many times, and we had many conversations where I told her, you have to keep doing this. There's nobody here that looks like you. You have to be the one in the room, and then I know that one day you're going to be the person passing this along. And then yesterday she called me and told me that she got her first job offer, which was super exciting. But her comment to me was, I don't know anyone else in this industry who's a female, and it's so great to have someone around to help coach me through this, because I don't think I could get the same perspective from a male. And so I've tried to sort of make a little online persona and do a lot of things and reach out to a lot of females who are lost and don't know where to go and don't know how to navigate it, because I think there is a huge gap in that. And so, I've worked a lot. I don't know if people know about Chic Geek, but I've worked a lot with the mentorship program in Chic Geek. And that's been really great. And I think just building the community and mentoring as much as you can. And even though I'm, relatively early in my career, I think still being able to reach out to people who are earlier and being seen and letting them know that there is this potential is so important.
Catherine?
Yeah, thank you. No, for my part, as someone who hopes to hire in the future, I stay very active in women in tech chat. So there's a number of them on Facebook, so you can find them, and I get great intel from them. But also when I do have, little jobs I need help with, that's where I post them. I go to the women's groups first, and this is, Sarah said, you always start your hiring way, way, way in advance. One of the reasons I do that is because I always try to go to the women groups first, post there first, see if I can hire out of there before I post it on Indeed or LinkedIn or whatnot. And then also I want to put the challenge out there. Let's not forget the next generation of girls in tech. So when we're talking about where to find them, let's make sure that we're all supporting Girls Learning Code and perhaps Hervolution, who are helping the next generation of girls to learn to become developers, so that there is that talent pool, 10 years from now.
Great. Leah?
Yeah, I don't want to be repetitive because I know we're short on time, so I'll just toss one extra thing in there, which is, for those of you that are leaders, one of the things I always do is I make sure that all the women on my team are set up with mentors, and that all the women on the team are also mentoring, because I think that's great experience to get. And I think one thing I found is that women do really like having other women they can talk to. That specific thing is important. So just make sure that, to Catherine's point, that you're investing in the future. Like, make sure that women on your own team are set up with the right mentors and the right mentorship opportunities.
Thank you so much. And I know, again, mindful of time here, I know that I feel like we could have clearly had an hour worth of discussion here today, maybe even longer. But just a quick reminder as well that we will be having another session next week as well. And if you want to sign up for that, we do want to have one audience question come through. So if the team can quickly enter that in, and I'll try to read it off the screen right now. Oh, there we go. I can scroll. What are the best interview questions when hiring men into leadership positions that you ask to ensure that you're getting a candidate that will support your view for diversity and inclusion best practices? Sarah?
Yeah, I threw it in the chat. Something that I think is really important to check and something it's important to look at Ask about a time that they faced a tough challenge or learning about diversity and inclusion, or ask about a time that they were an ally or they supported someone in an underrepresented group. Ask them about a time they faced a challenge on their team related to diversity and inclusion, and how they handled that situation. I think evidence-based asking for examples is really great. It's always great to know how they have handled it rather than how they would handle it, because I think anybody can say, oh, I would handle it this way. I want to know how you have in the past. So ask for examples, get curious, dig into it, ask about impact and follow-ups and what came out of it. But I think it's a very important question to ask.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us today for our panel discussion. And we look forward to bringing these more often. And so please sign up for our event next week, whether you can make it or not, it'll be pre-recorded. So you can always watch it on demand later. Have a great day, everybody, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. We will be able to answer, and we will work together here collaboratively to answer all the questions that were put in the chat. And thank you, everybody.